Welcome to On Contact. Today we talk with investigative journalist Nick Bryant about the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Maxwell was part and parcel of that whole operation, and she knows the kind of power that is. We're dealing with the apex of power, and I believe that it looks at this point like she is going to take the fall by herself. Her trial has been really fishy. I mean, first it was like a year from the time that she was indicted. They've had her in jail for a year, and it was supposed to start in July, but then it's been pushed back another 3 months. So it's not malfeasance, but it's certainly fishy. Nothing in the Jeffrey Epstein story makes any sense.
British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, held at New York's Metropolitan Detention Center and denied bail, will be tried this fall on sex trafficking charges for allegedly recruiting and grooming teenage girls to engage in sexual acts with the late American financier Jeffrey Epstein. She is reputed to have procured teenage girls for Epstein to abuse between 1994 and 2004 and allegedly paid the girls hundreds of dollars in cash after each encounter with Epstein. Epstein died in a New York jail cell in August 2019 in what authorities ruled was a suicide, although a doctor hired by Epstein's family to conduct an independent autopsy has disputed that conclusion. Maxwell has pleaded not guilty. But this is not a routine sexual abuse and trafficking case. Epstein socialized with the political, social, and financial elites, including Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak, former Democratic Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, Alan Dershowitz, Prince Andrew, and Bill Gates. It is alleged that he made his stable of underage women available to his powerful friends and filmed their sexual encounters with elaborate hidden surveillance cameras set up inside his residences. And yet, none of these powerful figures have been charged or investigated. The surveillance videos have vanished. Joining me to discuss this nexus of power and sexual abuse and the strange anomalies of the Epstein case is the investigative journalist Nick Bryant. Bryant first made public Epstein's black book with the names, phone numbers, and addresses for Epstein's elite social circle, along with the star-studded passenger logs to Epstein's private plane known as the Lolita Express, which often took his powerful guests to his private Caribbean island nicknamed Orgy Island. Bryant has written on the Epstein case for many publications, including Gawker. So why don't you lay out for us, Nick, quickly, so for people who aren't familiar, what it is that Epstein was charged with and what Maxwell has been charged with.
Okay. In 2005, a 14-year-old girl, accompanied by her parents, approached the Palm Beach Police Department. And she had said that she had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. She provided details of his anatomy and also details of his home in Palm Beach. And the detectives in that case for the Palm Beach Police Department, they pursued it tenaciously but gingerly because, after all, Jeffrey Epstein was, they thought, a wealthy philanthropic type person. And ultimately, they found 5 girls. There were more, they knew of more, but there were 5 girls that came forward, underage girls. And then there were a number of people that corroborated their stories. And ultimately, they wanted to indict Jeffrey Epstein. And the indictment was ready. They wanted to indict Jeffrey Epstein on 5 counts of child abuse. But the state of Florida took that case away from the Palm Beach Police Department and said that they decided to have a grand jury look into the allegations. And the Palm Beach Police Department was very upset about that because they had nailed Jeffrey Epstein. They had spent a year on Jeffrey Epstein and they had nailed him. So when the Epstein case went before the grand jury, and I don't know if your audience is familiar with grand juries, but when a grand jury indict someone, it sounds like a decree from the gods of jurisprudence. But grand juries have been notoriously corrupt in the past because jurors are just simply citizens that have shown up for jury duty and they've been funneled to a grand juror. And generally one person called the special prosecutor is chosen to show the evidence to the grand jurors and also to call witnesses. So there was a judge in New York, an appellate judge, that said a special prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. So what happened in the Epstein case is that only the Palm Beach Police Department nailed them. There were five underage girls that had come forward, but they knew of others. But only one of the girls was called before the grand jury, and she was skewered by the grand jury prosecutor. And ultimately, with that grand jury said that Jeffrey Epstein had not molested a single child and indicted him on one count of adult solicitation of prostitution. So it was, in fact, a ham sandwich.
So in 2008, the Justice Department intervened in this case, you write, to engineer a sweetheart deal. Explain what that was. And it had some anomalies to it, including, as you write, a federal non-prosecution agreement that granted immunity to all of his co-conspirators, including procurers and perpetrators.
Yes, once the feds took over, there were more aberrations of justice. So what happened when that grand jury didn't indict Epstein on a single count of child abuse, the Palm Beach Police Department just was very upset and got very vociferous about how corrupt that grand jury was. So the federal government stepped in, and the federal government was going to give us justice regarding Jeffrey Epstein. But they were as corrupt as the state grand jury. First of all, the Justice Department had a list of 32 Epstein victims, a list of 32 girls that had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. But Epstein's lawyers colluded with the Justice Department, and I've got some emails where there's definitely malfeasance and collusion going on. And what was worked out is with the feds, they told that the feds and the state worked out a deal where the feds worked out the non-prosecution agreement, which exonerated all the perpetrators and procurers. And Epstein was to do 18 months in a county jail, and he did 13 months. And that miscarriage of justice is very egregious because, as I said earlier, the Department of Justice had a list of 32 Jeffrey Epstein victims.
Let's talk about what it is he was charged with and the social circle, including, of course, Trump, Clinton, and others, that he ran in about his private island, about you were the one who released the flight logs. Alan Dershowitz, talk about his role in terms of defending Epstein. Talk a little bit about what we know from reports went on and who was involved. I mean, I think, for instance, Bill Clinton has said that he never visited Epstein's island. But can you lay out what that looked like?
In 2012, I acquired Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. And how that Black Book ultimately came to me was Alfredo Rodriguez was the house manager of Jeffrey Epstein. And he tried to sell it to an attorney who was representing one of the victims in civil litigation. And the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting on Alfredo Rodriguez. And that's how we got possession of the Black Book. But he had circled a number of players that he said were involved with Epstein and whom the FBI called material witnesses. And the names that are circled are, I mean, it leads to Mount Olympus. Trump's name is circled, Dershowitz's name is circled, George Mitchell's name is circled, Bill Richardson, Clinton's energy czar and former New Mexico governor was circled. Bruce King, former New Mexico governor, his name was also circled. And there were a number of financiers that were circled too. So, according to Alfredo Rodriguez, these people that were circled he had witnessed them in Palm Beach. Clinton's name was not circled, but Epstein had 22 contact numbers for Clinton. So obviously, Bill and Jeff were seemingly close. And Ghislaine Maxwell had told a former producer of 60 Minutes that Epstein did, in fact, have footage of both Trump and Clinton engaged in prurient acts with minors. And yes, Bill Clinton had said that he had never gone to Orgy Island, but that documentary that came out, Filthy Rich, about Jeffrey Epstein, definitely proves that Clinton had been at Orgy Island.
Let's talk about the surveillance cameras. How do we know they were there? Epstein had several residences, one in New Mexico, a townhouse in New York, his residence in Florida. What do we know about the surveillance system, and where do we get that information from?
Well, the first mention of Jeffrey Epstein's hidden cameras is from the Palm Beach Police Department when they executed a search warrant on his home in Florida. They found hidden cameras. And one of Epstein's victims, Maria Farmer, who was in New York, Epstein, I guess, because of his unbridled hubris, actually showed her a secret panel that opened, and she accompanied Epstein into this room where she said, quote unquote, men were monitoring cameras that were hidden in bedrooms and also in bathrooms. So Epstein was not working alone. According to Maria Farmer, Epstein's blackmail operation was not just Jeffrey Epstein. And then we also know from a Vanity Fair article that Jeffrey Epstein's Orgy Island was wired for audiovisual blackmail too. So there's a tremendous amount of corroboration that Jeffrey Epstein was a blackmail artist. But what people miss about this is Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout from a blue-collar family in Coney Island. There's no way that Jeffrey Epstein by himself could have blackmailed the most powerful people in the world. And some of them definitely have connections to organized crime and ruffians and murderers. And what happened with Jeffrey Epstein is he was obviously protected by a large organization, a nefarious organization that allowed him to continue to blackmail the world's most richest and powerful men. And Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney who ultimately signed off on Jeffrey Epstein's deal and was made Trump's labor secretary, he was going to go after Jeffrey Epstein, and he was told to back off because Jeffrey Epstein was quote unquote intelligence and it was above his pay grade. And I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal.
We're going to stop. We're just going to take a break there, Nick, and then come back. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about the nexus of power and sexual abuse in the Jeffrey Epstein case with investigative journalist Nick Bryant. Welcome back to On Contact. We continue our conversation about the nexus of power and sexual abuse in the Epstein-Maxwell case with investigative journalist Nick Bryant. So, Nick, I just want to talk a little bit about the type of abuse that these girls underwent. There's a quote, this is from the Guardian newspaper, and it's talking about Maxwell, who essentially worked as Epstein's procurer or pimp. A butler witnessed firsthand a 15-year-old Swedish girl crying and shaking because Maxwell was attempting to force her to have sex with Epstein, and she refused. Court documents filed by Giffrey's lawyers claim the girl allegedly said that Maxwell tried to force her to have sex with Epstein through threats and stealing her passport. And we have testimony, this is from, is it Juan Elisa, a second Epstein house manager, that Maxwell procured over 100 girls for Epstein. Talk about what happened to those girls? What was physically done to those girls, and Maxwell's role in this?
Well, Maxwell was marched lockstep with Jeffrey Epstein. Whatever Jeffrey Epstein was into, Maxwell was there. And she was definitely a co-conspirator with Jeffrey Epstein. And I've talked to Epstein's victims, and some of them were there. A couple of those power brokers were into demeaning the girls, and one of them was actually into assaulting these girls. And it really shows how sick they were, because Epstein would serve these poor girls up on a silver platter, and some of these really powerful pedophiles were unbelievably sadistic to the girls. And that is a trend that I've seen. I've been investigating these types of stories for quite some time, since 2002. And I wrote a book about a power broker pedophile network that was run out of Washington, D.C. And those power brokers were also, some of them were also into being really sadistic to the kids that were supplied to them, which is truly unfortunate, because some of the most powerful men in the world like to be sadistic to children. I mean, that's what gets them off.
I want to ask two questions. First of all, there were other major procurers, Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, Haley Robson, and others. None of them have been indicted. That's the first question I have for you. And the second is, what's happened to all this surveillance video?
Well, to answer the first question, that shows another major miscarriage of justice, because Haley Robinson and Kellen et al. Should have been all indicted. If this was actually, if the Justice Department was actually pursuing this case with the legitimacy that it had pursued the mafia, all those procurers would have been indicted, and they all could have been indicted on multiple counts of child trafficking, which carry a sentence between 15 years to life. So they would all be indicted, and you could throw multiple counts of child trafficking at them, and then they would be looking at 300 years, 400 years, 500 years, because they were all involved in trafficking a lot of girls, and then they would roll over on the big shots. But that isn't happening. Only Ghislaine Maxwell she's the only one that's being indicted, which is another major miscarriage of justice, because we know a number of the procurers. The New York Times wrote an article naming a number of the procurers.
What is it that would stop Maxwell from speaking about the role of a Clinton or a Dershowitz or anyone else who allegedly was being offered these women by Epstein?
Well, Maxwell was part and parcel of that whole operation, and she knows the kind of power that is. We're dealing with the apex of power, and I believe that it looks at this point like she is going to take the fall by herself. Her trial has been really fishy. I mean, first it was like a year from the time that she was indicted. They've had her in jail for a year, and it was supposed to start in July, but then it's been pushed back another 3 months. So it's not malfeasance, but it's certainly fishy. Nothing in the Jeffrey Epstein story makes any sense, according to our laws and protocols of justice. Nothing makes any sense in the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Let's go back to the surveillance video. Do you have any idea what's happened to that, where it is?
There was, when the police raided Jeffrey Epstein's house, they came across a number of DVDs. And I think Epstein was involved in making child pornography. According to one of the victims that I talked to, he was certainly involved. And there's other accounts of Jeffrey Epstein making child pornography. So those DVDs, and there was a DVD that said such and such and such and such. So I think that Epstein, in that in his vault, he might have had some blackmail material in addition to child pornography, but that was confiscated. And like everything in like all justice in the Jeffrey Epstein case, it went into a black hole, and it has yet to return.
Can you talk about some of the high-profile figures that we know something about? Prince Andrew would be one. Alan Dershowitz, who has vehemently denied that he ever, in fact, he said he never traveled anywhere without his wife, has denied, although one of the girls has said that she was prostituted or forced to have sexual relations with Dershowitz. Was it 6 times or 3 times? I don't remember. But talk about what we know about the interaction of some of these very high-profile figures with Epstein.
Well, Alan Dershowitz, from the beginning, when Epstein was first indicted, he was called in. He was one of the dream team of attorneys that was there to defend Jeffrey Epstein, and he scoured the girls' Facebook pages and everything about them so that he could ultimately show that. I mean, he tried to show that they were all lying, and Dershowitz is named by Virginia Giuffre as a perpetrator. And it's interesting that Alfredo Rodriguez also circled Dershowitz's name. And Dershowitz, there's another woman that said that she had sex with Dershowitz, and then Maria Farmer said that Dershowitz, when he would visit Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in New York City, would go upstairs where the girls were. So there's a tremendous amount of evidence that Dershowitz was involved with Jeffrey Epstein. And Dershowitz told the American lawyer that he never flew without his wife. But I had a bunch of passenger logs that shows Dershowitz flew without his wife, and flew with women named like Tatiana. And in the article that I did write about Dershowitz and the flight logs, a number of names were tossed out at him, and then he just started making kind of jokes out of them. And he was definitely nailed. And Dershowitz has a history. He wrote a op-ed for the LA Times saying that 15 years old should be the age of consent, and that anybody that's someone that is 50 years old or 60 years old, if they had sex with a 15-year-old, there would be no problem. So Dershowitz has shown he went after these girls very hard. 2 of them have come forward and said that they've had sex with Dershowitz. One kind of witnessed it. He's circled by the house manager. He's named by Virginia Giuffre, and he's been on an offensive. And it's really, with Dershowitz, he's either a good man trying to protect his name, or really a vile human being that has no conscience whatsoever. And I'll let your audience decide.
Let me, Nick, we have about a minute and a half. I want you to step back and tell our viewers what this says about the inner circle of power itself. Because this crosses lines. Trump, Clinton, I'm a Republican, Democrat, doesn't make any difference.
I wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal, and it was very, very similar to what we have with Epstein. That book was published in 2009. And it showed a power broker pedophile network. Kids were flown around. Places were bugged for audiovisual blackmail. There was a character very much like Jeffrey Epstein. His name was Craig Spence. So what it shows is, and this network was operational in the 80s. It was a bigger network than Epstein's. Epstein's was in business much longer than the network that I wrote about, but the network I wrote about was much bigger. And it shows, unfortunately, I believe it shows that blackmail is an endemic part of our political system. And if a politician is filmed having sex with a minor, that's it. He's owned. If he it's a blackmail photographer who I got to for the book that I wrote said that these guys are on a yacht and they can have anything on a yacht and it's a beautiful day. But if they decide to get off the yacht, then the people on the yacht are going to make sure that they drown. So none of these players that are compromised are going to do anything. They're going to do what they're told, and they're not going to get off the yacht.
And it's just an updated version of what J. Edgar Hoover used to do, in essence. So you have, let's call it the deep state, intelligence agencies. It just becomes a mechanism of control. Would that be a correct summation?
Absolutely. What Americans are very naive about blackmail in their political system. J. Edgar Hoover deployed blackmail. I mean, the CIA has deployed blackmail all over the world, as has the KGB. What's kind of interesting is Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old who was married. And there was a muckraking journalist who outed Alexander Hamilton having that affair. And when Thomas Jefferson became president, the muckraking journalist felt that Jefferson owed him an appointment, and Jefferson wouldn't. So he outed Jefferson on having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, I believe. So, and Americans just don't understand this, that political blackmail is a time-honored tradition in the United States of America.
That was investigative journalist Nick Bryant on the Jeffrey Epstein case.